Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you today.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you today?
Doing well and ready and raring to go.
Did you get some exercise in over the weekend?
Yes, but on one day I stated for sure. We had a bad day with the rain and the cold.
Yeah.
But it made me do more productive work inside. So I want to talk today about a magazine, journal, newspaper that I've been reading for a lot of years. Yeah. And it's been generally accepted, you know, by the media, by the individuals, that it's a conservative paper, the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
But that has changed. Different owners have come in, and I just lump them in. I don't know what you do with them. I just lump them in with mainstream media and don't depend on it. But all of a sudden, but anyway, they're not by themselves, but it looks like they might be leading the charge of having a different attitude than 100% super defense of Biden for whatever he does.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, they're getting more objective, and maybe the market's doing this and say that people are sick and tired of listening to their nonsense, or maybe they have another strategy. It made me think about different strategy, and, and I remember clearly when when Nixon, when they had to get rid of him, they had to have a better vice president. So they took care of that. And right now, it looks like they're lining up, but they might be running into a bit of trouble. It might not be an easy thing to do. And it is rather amazing that that Biden has gotten as far as he did by being locked in the basement.
Yeah, really.
So it's something that is, I think, a big deal because there is an attitude change. Matter of fact, we've talked about it for a couple of weeks now around the election. We thought maybe there'd be a shift, and you can understand why they might want to, because they might be in a box. You know, what are they going to do? Vice presidents move up, they become presidents usually. So, we can't wait. Kamala's great. She's so funny.
It's so clever.
Entertaining. So they have their worries, but the Wall Street Journal shreds the vaccine makers, Biden administration, over the deceptive booster campaign. So they're taking them on, and it looks like Biden has to be on the defense, but he has a good press secretary. She can handle that.
Yeah, she can handle anything. Well, let's put it up. Here is the article, and we, of course, noticed it in Zero Hedge, the first one. But it's, if you read deep into the article, they do definitely shred, as Zero Hedge put it, this bivalent COVID booster. Now, they're not shredding the entire narrative, but I think one of the things that we've been trying to say over the past, at least 2.5 years, is that we believe that the narrative is so weak ultimately that that's why they had to control it so completely. And any crumbling around the edges of the narrative, in this case, it is you got to get an updated bivalent vaccinated booster, because that's the only thing you can do. Well, the Wall Street Journal and its editorial staff said no, they're being deceptive. They don't have any evidence to back up their claim, and there's huge problems with it. So, this particular article is not necessarily a takedown of the entire narrative, but when you start seeing them on shaky ground, at least in our view, I think we share this view, it becomes more and more dangerous, and you're seeing more different things we'll talk about today, I think.
Yeah, I think what they're talking about is false advertisement. It's, in the old days, that would be considered fraud, and it wouldn't be difficult, but most people have hidden behind the FDA. They'll do the testing, and once they approve it, and extensive testing. But the big thing here is even the pretense of that, they didn't do a testing. And they just popped it out there. Then they just milked it to death about it. So to me, it seems like there has to be a way to overcome this protection that the Congress gave, to the pharmaceutical companies, that you can't sue them. Because it really is a fraudulent proposal, what they've done in the last 2 or 3 years, less so now. But, and this is why people are waking up, maybe some of those things they were telling us how wonderful it was just isn't working. But at the same time we were reading about this and people, maybe waking up in the right direction about finding out really what was going on with these pharmaceuticals. Here Here's an article, a headline that says, the state moves to revoke Dr. Ryan Cole's license for prescribing ivermectin. He's still the criminal.
Yeah.
And they're going to take his license.
Yeah.
So it's still out there. It's hard to erase that kind of stuff. And there's, even though there's been a major shift with the people who have put pressure on the politicians, there's still a lot of people there that better be safe than sorry. But I'm just wondering if Elon Musk is feeling the same way today as he did last week.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the other factors that I think that we want to kind of bring together today, and I didn't show you this because I had it in my thing, but I didn't bring it out before we went on. But I think you'll get why this is important. Rasmussen, who we cite quite often, they do a lot of public opinion research, and this is. And we are going to talk about Musk later, but this was what prompted Musk to tweet out a revelation that was really fascinating, was this exact study. So let's put this next one up. And it's pretty easy to follow, Dr. Paul. They did a survey. 68% of 260 million adults, that's 177 million people, indicate they received the COVID-19 vax. And 7% of those reported major side effects. That translates into 177 times 0.07 into approximately 12 million people, reports Rasmussen. The CDC, they continue, says major side effects are rare. How many people does the CDC estimate had major side effects? So here, what they're pointing out is that 7% of the people that took the shot are reporting major side effects. But the CDC still maintains that side effects are rare. And so Rasmussen went in and said, well, what is the definition of rare? And let's put this next one up, because this is the definition of rare. Rare is when you're talking about 0.01% of major side effects. So by the own definition of rare, Dr. Paul, these shots don't qualify. And in fact, they move up to not rare, not uncommon, but actually common, because common side effects between 1 in 100 people and 1 in 10 people, 1 to 10%. So 7% major side effects. They can't keep calling it rare, so there's more deception there on this. So Rasmussen is doing a very interesting job here, I think.
You know, when I was looking at all this, I got to thinking of trying to figure out these numbers. You know, certain continents don't have as much, and how does it happen? It's some of the articles are as honest as they can be. They sort of throw up their hands because they haven't had the data to really make a final decision on it. But the whole thing is, I think it's sort of strange, and we are going to talk a little bit more about Africa, but it comes to my mind right now in Africa, the statistics are completely different. They didn't get vaccinated like everybody else. So why wouldn't the superficial, amateur response be, oh, they didn't get it vaccinated? Maybe the vaccinations and the boosters we're part of the problem. Maybe there's a new virus, or maybe they get something because they have interference. And you see stories once in a while like that, but it's hard to have the data because the government and the pharmaceuticals were so determined to mess this stuff up and rush to judgment. And the judgment was, we're going to make as much as we can off this and as quickly as we can.
Exactly. And you referenced this doctor. I think it was in Utah. Let's put it up next because, no, Washington State, that's right. Let's put this up next. This is from the Epic Times. State moves to revoke Dr. Ryan Cole's license for prescribing ivermectin and for COVID-19 vaccine comments. So he made some comments that the Washington State Medical Board didn't like, Dr. Paul, and so they're trying to revoke his license. So they're trying to maintain this narrative. And let's do the next one. I just did a couple of clips out of the article for a couple of quotes. The state alleges that Cole made numerous false and misleading statements during the pandemic about the pandemic, vaccines, ivermectin, and the effectiveness of protective masks. These statements were harmful and dangerous to individual patients, etc., etc. He spread a widespread negative impact on the health and well-being of our communities, is the claim, and that he provided negligent care because he prescribed ivermectin, which wasn't allowed. And let's kind of dig in a little bit to see what he said, because it is kind of interesting. He seems like a pretty brash guy. He would have been good to have on the show. He's the founder of Cole Diagnostics. And he said in interviews with the Epic Times that he observed a spike in unusual cancers and other problems after the messenger RNA COVID-19 vaccines were introduced in late 2020. He asserted that heart inflammation is known to be caused by the shots, as well as other issues not proven to be linked that stem from introducing the spike protein in the human body. Now, this is not us. This is what he got in trouble for saying. And then he says, here's a quote, "The naysayers that say, oh, the spike isn't a toxin," he said. And then he continued, "I'm like, the cells don't lie, and that's my defense. The cells don't lie. These people aren't looking at the cells under the microscope. They're not seeing the danger I am. Many of my colleagues are. The cells don't lie. If it's inconvenient to what you want to tell yourself, that's fine. But the cells don't lie, the clots don't lie, the damaged organs don't lie," he added. Pretty strong statements, but he's just observing what he's seeing in his practice.
You know, things are turned on its head, obviously, because here we have somebody that is telling us the truth from our viewpoint, and others, at least he's stating a position. But he's not being charged with that. It's just that he's differing from the scenario. It's the fact that the people who have control can't be challenged at all. So he's being punished. But now the pharmaceuticals who may do some lying and putting this stuff out and pushing out, they're exempt. They have immunity. The Congress gives them immunity and no liability on that. So the thing has flip-flopped, and it's also back to the issue that in our society today, if you're a good liar, you're rewarded. And there was a lot of lying going on, and still going on. And boy, beware, you know, you're endangered if you're a truth teller. If you're telling the truth, and then you can get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's just interesting in this article about him, if you can go to this next clip, because they admit that, well, you know, some of those bad, terrible things he said turns out to be that they're true. And this is from the article. Some of the statements the commission referenced as false and misleading were actually accurate. So that's interesting. So some part of the case against him is objectively not true. Among them, Cole's noting that natural immunity or post-infection immunity against COVID-19 is superior to protection bestowed by vaccines. That's been shown or indicated in many studies, including a study from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and a paper from Israel. So even their own case against him, the stuff he said that was untrue, well, it turns out to be true.
And the average person gets the TV and the pump, and they're supposed to be able to figure this out. And but what their handicap is where are the people that we can rely on? In the old days, you did have people. You know, most of the time you went to your family doctor and relied on them. But the family doctor, you know, for a long time did believe in natural immunity. But here, you can be punished for believing those kind of things or saying them out loud. So to me, it's a sad situation. But there's a shift. I think it's good. I'm glad Wall Street Journal brought the subject up. And eventually, though, you know, I don't fear the fact that you can destroy truth. I think it's impossible. You know, it's sort of like you can destroy the moon tomorrow. So they will work at it, and they benefit by it, and it's worthwhile for them on the short term if they can lie and fib and distort and make a lot of money. But long term, they can't change it. You know, if truth is truth, no matter what you do, no matter how many times you lie about it, you still find out. But in history, you find out, you know, sometimes a year later, 2 years later, a decade later, sometimes many years later, which is sad and frustrating. But you still, when you find it, you know, the principle is living in a society where you're allowed to speak it and work it out, compete, have debates, and that's what was destroyed. Any debate at all. When I, you know, at the beginning, how many times I got upset about the fact, well, in medical school we had debates. They taught us that as a resident. You know, you take this side of it and this side and do your research and see what you can do to prove one form of treatment was better than another, and that to me was one of the things that was very helpful for me to thinking about it. But now that process is illegal.
Thinking is illegal.
Right.
Well, you kind of teased this one a little bit, and this is another part of the narrative. This is the theme of our show today that's really breaking up, and this is nothing brand new. We talked about this over the 2 years of COVID. But here is from the Epoch Times by way of Zero Hedge. Africa is starkly unvaccinated and starkly unvanquished by COVID. It's a real head scratcher. And go to the next clip, because you can see, I have a little better clip of that graph. Here you go. Now you can see the density of vaccination among peoples, and you see countries, especially the US, Latin America, South America, China, heavy, Europe, heavy vaccination. And then you look at Africa, extremely light, extremely low levels, 20%, 10%, less than 10% of vaccination. You would expect for them to have, of course, the highest rate of COVID deaths. Well, let's look at this next picture, and I will apologize for it because it's not a very good, well, it's okay, I guess. But look at those red parts of this picture, and you see them heavy in Europe, heavy in the US, heavy in Southeast Asia. That's the density of COVID deaths. And you look at Africa, and you don't see at all these kinds of deaths. You don't see COVID deaths, but they haven't been vaccinated. And we can honestly say, what is that? How do you explain it? How do you explain it? You know,
a little minor common sense could probably do a much better job on what they're doing. They're doing a good job because they're distorting the truth, and a lot of people rely on that source of information, and of course, it's going in the wrong directions. In economics, it's sort of like when you have the corrections necessary to correct the government's problems, the more you do to try to prevent it, the worse the depression gets. Yeah. And that was the best example was in the 30s. But that's what was doing here. They're pretending, and they have a more intervention. It was intervention. It may turn out someday that almost all the problems were related to bad treatment, you know, because they immediately took over the treatment. The doctors weren't permitted to think. You know, and some of the doctors, and a lot of things throughout history, medical history, it's the individual doctor who's observing and paying attention to the patient and using maybe a medication for, if he hears something, you know, was beneficial to somebody, to test it and find out. Yeah. So they've made a lot of discoveries, and yet now that was the first thing that they had to do. You lose your job, you're out of here, you lose your credentials, your reputation, and the people who depend on truth and lying, the biggest enemy to them is telling the truth. I'll tell you what, that they can't handle psychologically, and they shouldn't be able to handle it, you know, socially either, because they should be exposed.
Yes, absolutely, exposed and jailed. Well, here's from that same article, because the question is, how did they do so well? I don't know. Maybe it's something in the water. I don't know what it is. Nobody knows. But here's something interesting from the article that might point to a reason. And this is how Africa defeated COVID so decisively without vaccines. And it goes on, part of the African continent's success is no doubt due to a fortunate accident of microbiology, infectious diseases, pharmacology, and immunity. And I bolded this part. It so happens that two of the most effective treatments for COVID, ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, were also routine prophylactic weekly medicines throughout equatorial Africa, because they have been known for a half a century as the most effective, applicable, and safest anti-parasite medications. And so that is an interesting theory. That's because they were taking this stuff all the time.
You know, and this is a perfect example of what I was trying to allude to, is that the doctor's taking care of these patients, and they're not dying, they're doing better, and they're also knowing they're prescribing these other drugs for other diseases, and they're doing better. And it's the doctor that's taking care of the patients that might make those first discoveries. At the same time, the other side's purposely hiding it. Yeah. You know, if there's any hint of it, you don't get advertisements from them that you have to silence them. But then why? And of course, we talk a lot about the profits involved, and it's just still hard for me to believe that there can be that much evil in the medical profession. But unfortunately, it looks like there is, and I guess I get shift more in that direction than ever. I was probably more naive before because it probably all happened, but this might be the most extreme it's ever been. This is a big deal. We know about the military-industrial complex. You know, they build weapons for national defense to defend our Constitution and our liberties. Well, whoever believes that, you know,
a lot of people, sadly,
they still believe it. So,
well, this was a big revelation on Twitter and around the country recently. Musk is in the news a lot, and people wondered about his vaccine situation. He's a fascinating guy, but he revealed, I think it was yesterday, but certainly over the weekend, he revealed his own situation. And if our theme today is cracks in the narrative, this is basically a boot kicking in the narrative. Let's put this next one up. A very personal revelation for him. He said, I had major side effects from my second booster shot. Felt like I was dying for several days. Hopefully no permanent damage, but I don't know. And then they went on to say, and my cousin, who's young and in peak health, had a serious case of myocarditis. Had to go to the hospital. Now, he tweeted this in response to that Rasmussen study that I showed earlier about this 7% major side effects. He said, well, I'm one of them, basically, and here's what happened to me. He felt like I was dying for days.
I've concluded that being rich doesn't automatically qualify you for the best judgment on how to take care of your health, because it's just as absolutely bizarre. I mean, the guy has to be very, very bright, but maybe it's in engineering. And why, with all the information available, to at least slow down, take a breath before you take the shot, you know, but you're not allowed to. You have to, or you can't go to school, you can't play games, and, it shows you how incestuous, this whole thing of wokeism is. I mean, that's been worked on for a long time, this obedience to the woke position, and that, I think, is the major epidemic that we have to deal with.
Well, he actually revealed why he took the shot. He said, and I don't have the tweet, I didn't put it up, but he said he was very reluctant. He didn't want to do it. But he has a gigafactory in Germany, huge Tesla factory, and he really wanted to go visit it. And he said they wouldn't let him go visit the factory until he took the shot. So he said, I want to go visit my factory. So that's when he took the shot. So he didn't want to do it. He did it, and then he says he almost died. And it's very interesting to see that. It's very sad too. I mean, like he says, hopefully there's no damage. But his dad has been looking on at what's been happening. Let's put on this next tweet. We both saw this. This is Paul Joseph Watson. Musk's father, I'm really afraid something might happen to Elon. He says his son is a bit naive about the enemies he's making. And we would add to that, he certainly made a lot more by revealing his vaccine situation. Yeah,
he's going to have enemies on both sides.
Ooh, yeah.
So, that is a sad story. But how do they handle it? Because I know of other stories when it isn't as complicated and involving so much money. But what if you don't take the shot and your day job and you're just a middle class income person, and they say, well, you can't come in here, you can't even come into the plant unless you do that. I mean, this is really it's sort of a blackmail. They say, well, and then they give you the statistics that lie to you, but and a lot of people who take the shots don't die, obviously. So they're always playing the odds, which is really sad. But it's criminal because it's the opposite of how problems like this would be handled in a libertarian society. Because in a society that believes in liberty, both sides have to be in agreement. Everything is voluntary. Nobody is forced to do anything that they don't want to, as long as people aren't hurting and stealing from other people. So these problems, maybe like in Africa, they were taking pills voluntarily because they didn't want to get certain diseases, and they were protected, and it turns out that might have helped them with COVID.
Yeah, it is interesting. Well, hopefully his dad is not right, but his dad gave him some good advice. You got to be careful. And it wasn't just the vax. He talked about the Twitter files, where we find out what the FBI's been up to, how it's been controlling social media, how the intelligence community has been manipulating our media and our thoughts. Turns out he's got a lot of security guards around him. He can afford them. But, you know, even the president, if you go the wrong way of the deep state, you can have problems.
The only part of the story is I wanted to get more information on this. It was a little sad for me to see the bitterness, the family bitterness, because that can't be much fun. You can have a lot of money, but no matter how they rationalize, and these kind of conflicts exist, right? I know that, but they exist, and it's a shame that you could be very comfortable, but then there's this difficulty on personalities. It's hard for me to understand about father and son, you know.
It's sad, it's sad. Well, Father knows best. And here's a family that doesn't have these problems, thank goodness. Let's do our last story for the day, if you're ready to move on, Dr. Paul.
I am.
Here's someone we know and love. Rand Paul says the shift in the Biden documents coverage shows that the media wants to ease him out. He was on the Laura Ingraham show a couple of days ago, and this is reporting in the Washington Examiner, and he has an interesting thought, and I think you and I have talked about this, if not on the show, certainly in private. Why is all of a sudden the media, which has ignored this for so long, why is the media that should be friendlier to Biden really picking this up?
Well, I know, and Rand sort of addresses that. You know, a lot of people call me and they're interested, and I usually shy away because I don't want to distract from what he's doing, this sort of thing. And but they'll come and say, well, does he call and ask for advice? I said, no, I call him and ask him for advice.
That's two-way street.
It's a little bit different because I've never been in the Senate. So, but no, I think that he has it correct, and that there is a shift. I don't think he had the magic permanent answer, but there definitely is a shift, and it's politics, and he understands politics.
Yes, very, very well. Here's a quote from the article, if we can put it up. If we have that last, I think it's the last clip, put that one up. And this is from that same Examiner column. The media's startling change in the last week when it comes to coverage of President Joe Biden's classified documents case shows they don't want him to run in 2024. According to Senator Rand Paul. And here's a quote. I think if you watch the news cycle, there's a startling difference in the last week or two, particularly over the classified documents and perhaps over some of the corruption charges with Hunter Biden, he told Laura Ingraham. They've been steadfast in ignoring this, you know, for years and really not reporting on it at all. And a lot of people have suggested this, that they're realizing that Biden is becoming more of a burden than an asset, and they want to get this out of the way. They want to get this problem out of the way, maybe not get him out of office, but at least convince him, look, you are damaged goods, buddy, you know, and you shouldn't run again, so then they can start anew. And maybe we talked about Gavin Newsom or someone.
You know what I think really tipped this over is when Biden had these secret papers found in his house, and it blows his case, and they're just screaming and hollering, and they're hysterical. Oh, but it's different. I mean, Trump is a bad guy. Of course, Trump was the president, and he did have different, it wasn't identical. It was absolutely different. But this is what just ruined their scenario. There was always Trump, and they've been able to get away with it since 16. Hillary was able to get away with it, and they keep doing it. They thought they would never be caught on this. And now, all of a sudden, they found out that, yes, people, and they're skirmishing around there, trying to dispel this whole notion. But that is it's a sorry state of affairs.
Well, Ron Klain, you know, his chief of staff, who people say is actually the real president, he's out. Maybe he's trying to go to somewhere else. Maybe he's going to the re-election. But he's out, which is a big deal, I think. And one of the other aides, I think, took the blame, they put her under the bus over this whole strategy of slow walking this. And I don't think it served them very well, because every time anyone goes into his house, they find some more classified documents. Oh, I got to go get some towels and take a shower. Oh my gosh, you know, what is in here? They had now the FBI were in there, they found some stuff. The lawyers were in there, they found some stuff. So the slow walking it instead of just being honest, you know, it's like you referenced Watergate and Nixon earlier. It's not necessarily the break-in, it's the cover-up that did him in.
That's right, but I still think they remember the story about Agnew, even if they weren't born back at that time.
Yeah.
No, but the Agnew thing, everybody knew, and the Republicans probably rolled over a little bit faster because there were infractions. But when you compare they're comparing infractions by Trump versus Biden. And my opinion is they're much greater with Biden. But back then, if you compare Nixon's infractions compared to Trump's infraction, you know, they're rather, or Biden's infraction, they're rather minor. But they had to get rid of Agnew, and right now they have a bid. They know they don't have the freedom to get rid of Biden next week.
Yeah.
Because then they have a bigger burden. If you want, it wouldn't be the way to build the Democratic Party is get Harris in there. Yeah, but this week there was a positive story. She has certainly grown up.
Okay.
She's now a much more adult vice president than she was last week. And so they're preparing that, but they know they can't get away with that because I think that the damage is done for them. But I think they're squirming. How do we get rid of Biden? And our option is Harris.
Yeah,
so
that's. I mean, I'm under no illusions. I know that the right-wing Twitter and right-wing media only picks out the goofiest stuff she says to highlight. But I mean, I've seen clip after clip of her saying things that just boggle the mind. You know, I mean, it's really, really bad. You know, as many bad things as Obama did as president, you know, he could actually give a pretty good speech. You know, it wasn't too bad. But I'm going to close out, Dr. Paul, if that's okay, by just thanking our viewers. I do want to mention on this whole documents thing, we did an article by our friend Peter Van Buren. We put it up on Ron Paul Institute website, ronpaulinstitute.org, and he has a really interesting, fresh analysis of who was worse, Biden, Trump, or Hillary, with regard to the treatment of classified materials. It's a really good article, as everything that Peter does, so I would highly recommend that. Again, thanks everyone for watching the show today. Back to you, Dr.
Very
Paul.
good. Well, I don't think there will be a big contest there if you go by numbers, because I think Hillary's way ahead of the other two, and I think Trump has some defense that Biden doesn't have, because what they're trying to say is that the responsibilities and the authority of a president is just a little bit different than a vice president. And the vice president has been said not to have much authority at all. It's just depends on what the president decides to give him. But that is a situation that they're going to have to work out, and the Republicans can sort of gloat a bit. But I think it's all superficial. I think this is just the noise you hear, because the real battles aren't mentioned too often, because the real battles, the deep state against, you know, a free society, against liberty, and it goes on, and they totally ignore that. So that's the reason why you can change administration, you can change the presidents, you can have bankruptcies and all, but if you have the Fed printing the money for the noisiest people around, if the government can be run by the security state secretly, and when you have the CIA and the FBI in control by the political parties and they manipulate elections, believe me, that's a big problem. And it's just not a one-party deal. I mean, one party may be worse than the other, but that kind of stuff has been going on a long time. And, you know, the whole welfare warfare state running up deficits, that is a bipartisan thing. It's all made up because the people believe that interventionism, the government should intervene, take care of you, make you safe, make you secure, and bring peace to the world, protect your Constitution. Only government can do that. And only government can lie through their teeth and make that all the excuse to take over your life and your property. And that is what happens. I think the government has taken over our property, because the income tax is a wicked tax, because it assumes it owns every penny you earn. Then the government tells you which part you can keep and how much. And then also, if you have property, I'll get my own property and live on my own property. Yeah, as long as you pay your rent. You pay your rent to the government. So we're a long way off, you know, from living in a libertarian society, quite a bit different than it was in our early history, because there was a lot more respect for individual liberty and private property and voluntarism. And there's no reason why we can't set that as a goal, so we at least go in that direction instead of capitulating and just going for who's going to be the decider of the intervention. I know how to run things better than they know how to run things. That argument goes on and on. It's wasted time until we get to the real issue of what freedom is all about. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.